thank you so much for coming. So my name is Shaheen, and we with Tom and Puya and a couple other people work on Growth Colony and you know, bring these community and create this community and bring these events together. Really, tonight we have Will, who started something called the Growth Hackers Melbourne, and which is the reincarnation. The Growth Colony is kind of the reincarnation of Growth Hackers Melbourne, and Will has been in the growth scene for some time. Does anyone know Will? Just show of hands. Yeah, there we go. So, but for those of you who don't know Will, he is kind of like a veteran in the growth marketing community in Melbourne, and I've personally learned quite a lot from him. I think first time maybe I met Will maybe 2 years ago or something like that, and the first meeting was just blew my mind. I actually met Will through one of the events that he had, and which was again Growth Hackers Melbourne, and he was talking about data. He was talking about data when not a lot of people were talking about data. Data kind of became sexy last year, and everyone, you know, all the agencies become data-driven agencies, but he was kind of talking about it about 2 years ago. So it was very refreshing to get that view. And after you know, creating the Growth Colony community and kind of transforming it from what it was, we thought it would be awesome to have Will as the first speaker for the series that we have. Now, in terms of what's happening with Growth Colony, we're aiming to have one event every 2 months, but increase that later on to one event every month. And really the aim of it is to become a growth marketing community in Melbourne, at least for the time being. A place that anyone who's interested in marketing and growth could come in and do a bit of brainstorming and so on and so forth. So I'll stop talking. This is kind of like a Q&A session, but please help me welcome Will to the stage. Grab the mic. Thank you. You gotta turn the mic on the. Yes, that's great. So thank you very much for joining us today, Will. Really, a big pleasure. But I did a bit of an introduction. But can you tell us a little bit about Will as well?
Yeah, I feel very humbled hearing you describe our first meeting and talk about it like that. But I'll try and kind of explain a little bit more about what I do. So basically, I've kind of been in this online marketing space. Started out selling PPC ads on eBay. My tactic as a kind of young 16-year-old was buy old Macs, disassemble them, and sell all the little components individually. And you could buy an old Mac for $300 or $400 and sell all the parts for about $2,000. So that was a good way to make some money. And then I kind of left school, did a gap year, and discovered organic traffic, SEO. Really obsessed over that. And then moved into social in about 2007-8, just when those kind of platforms actually really came through. And it was all organic social because paid components weren't available yet. And then the whole time we're selling physical products. And I guess the kind of realization happened, which is that we could sell digital products. And then later on in the early 2000s, it was like, oh, we just sell software, we don't even have to sell a product. So that's the kind of evolution, and over that time, it's moved from kind of stalwarts of online marketing, such as SEO and social, and email and others, to product-based marketing and really data-driven marketing, I suppose.
Yeah, we're going to be diving into that quite in detail, but maybe give us a little bit of introduction about Ausmed as well, and what is Ausmed and what you guys were doing.
Yeah, so Ausmed's a family business. My mum started the company 30 years ago, and that was where I took my gap year and realised none of her sales were being done online. So I kind of got in there and was just playing around, and that's where I really started to apply my trade. But what Ausmed does today is we're Australia's largest private provider of continuing professional development to healthcare professionals. So right now we have about a quarter of all health professionals using our service in the country. Healthcare is the largest employer in the country as well. There's about 1.3 million healthcare workers. And our plans at the moment are global expansion and trying to be one of those companies that takes product from Australia and sells it to the world, and not just another domestic Australian business that has global potential but never really realised it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to be talking quite a lot about most of the things that you mentioned over there, because I know there are people in the audience who are very interested about growth and how did you guys go about doing that? What were kind of the methodology and the mindset that you were using? And then maybe we'll talk about data later on and how you use data for the growth and what are you busy with today? But in the middle, maybe when we stop talking about growth specifically, we'll open up the floor for anyone who has a couple questions. But tell us maybe a little bit about the growth that Ausmed has seen in the past couple of years, and then we'll dig into the nitty-gritty stuff.
Yeah. So I think probably the most important thing for me to mention is that my whole kind of vision as a person, my long-term goal, is that Melbourne and Australia is able to build better companies that compete on a world scale. And my belief is that although we're really great at creating products, and our universities are a great example of this in the form of their research output, we're not very good at commercialising that research, aka taking it to market or growing a market around the product that we sell. And what I believe is that growth in kind of all of its forms, from marketing to sales to just getting traction with the product itself, is what's holding a lot of great Australian ideas back from being great Australian companies. So I enjoy doing things like this, and the short stories that I share with you are designed to help you kind of bridge those gaps and potentially take your great idea and build a great company. And now I can't remember the question.
Well, no, okay. Let me ask another question. Okay, let me ask a little bit broader question. When you talk about growth, because I know you do have a kind of like a philosophy, kind of methodology. When you think about growth, how do you look at when we talk about a product or a business? How do you look at the growth and dissect it?
Yeah. So the first question that we want to ask is, does it actually work? So marketing and a lot of marketers can pluck out numbers that appear to be to suggest that whatever it is that you decided to do, or your A/B split test, whatever it's been, is actually working. But the problem is that very rarely do they trace that right down to how valuable is that customer over the long term. And the kind of philosophy that we started using in the early 2000s to do this was what you've probably heard Dave McClure's pirate metrics. What's called the pirate metrics. So that's that's acquisition, activation, retention, referral revenue, and then potentially resurrection for customers that you lose. And just by introducing that framework to start with, you start to actually break up the whole kind of conversion funnel and not just treat all acquired users the same way from all different channels. You start to break out the channels, you start to see how the channels perform in their own right. Are people who sign up from Facebook more likely to be retained over 30 days but less likely over 90 or over the long term? How much is that user worth? And once you get that transparency through the kind of product and over the long term, you can start to build a much better business, and you'll find that you're starting to organise all of your efforts around the channels and the customers that lead to a company, and not just a kind of bell-shaped revenue kind of curve, right up and then right back down.
Gotcha. How many people have heard about the pirate metrics? Just show of hands. Okay. Let's talk about pirate metrics and how that relates to Ausmed and how you guys start going through that process. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want to start? Where did you guys start, and why did you start at that point?
Yeah. So basically, every business effectively starts with a hypothesis, and largely that's a belief that you're able to develop, that there's a problem you can create a solution to that problem. When you put those two things together, you now have a product. And lastly, that there's a market that will service that product and all that, and a market that's big enough that lets you actually build a business. Our hypothesis was that, and we saw this through our customer service, traditionally we ran, and we still do, many events all across the country. And one of the requirements for our customers was to keep a record of all the events that they've attended. And that's pretty standard for all professionals who are required to do CPD, such as accountants or lawyers. They need to keep a log of those CPD events that they attend, or any CPD that they do. And none of them really had a way to do that. So when they were audited by the respective agencies, they would just contact us and say, I'm being audited, can you give me everything you've got over the last 5 years of my learning? And although it's not our responsibility to do that, we would be able to provide it in most cases. And we thought, really, to reduce this kind of problem, we should build some software that lets them keep track of all of this themselves. And that was just the idea. Healthcare is it's not a very tech-savvy market, believe it or not. I'm not sure if anyone's been in a hospital recently, but most of the equipment is actually not that modern. I'm sure if you went to Peter Mac, you'd find modern equipment, but Royal Melbourne, just over the road, is still running less modern equipment. You've got problems with network availability. It's a government employer, so a lot of websites, a lot of services are blocked. So there was lots of risks around, firstly, does anyone want to do this because they're not doing it today? That is, document their CPD. Secondly, if we could build a product, which is a solution to that problem, can people use that product? They don't have computers with them, they're not online all day. The only thing they've got is their smartphone. And so we kind of worked through those in a very, very small scale to start with. And the way that we would do it is we would build a prototype. We would head down to the Royal Children's Hospital, because it's just down the road from us, at lunchtime. We'd have a little sign saying, we'll trade coffee for like 5 minutes kind of thing. We'll buy you a coffee if you sit with us for 5 minutes. And then we'd just say, have you done any learning recently? Yes. Okay, can you just document it using this paper form? And start to even just collect some data around how people record their learning, because we didn't really know that to begin with. So that was kind of just testing the hypothesis, and that's where it all really began. And that's where the first data collection started. So we would build a spreadsheet, and we'd just keep a record of how many people went through, and then of all the spots in the fields that they'd filled in of the form, and that was where it all began, one at a time.
How many people did you talk to?
Oh, it would have only been, we do it all the time, but back then, 5 people,
Gotcha.
And you'd have to pretend that you're just like a uni kid.
Yeah, that you're building something with your brother, and can you help me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And we actually had one person, I had one person say, he was like, oh, don't worry about doing this, you should check out Ausmed, they're already doing all this. And I was like, okay, trying to play it cool. But yeah, so that's how we started collecting the data. And that was just to test the hypothesis before we went through, okay, can we acquire customers at scale for this? Can we activate those customers? Moreover, once we do acquire a user, under the promise of we can help you keep track of all your professional development, how many of them go on to actually do that? And then start moving through all the other components of that.
Right, so you started from the top of the funnel with acquisition. Well, you did the product market fit. You figured out what is the product that the market wants through your research, and then you started at the top of the funnel when it comes to acquisition. Is that?
Yeah, I think on the product market fit, how many people in here are building their own company or building their own product, or building a product or company? Most people, or a fair few people. So the way that I've seen it is that most products, and therefore potential businesses, are trying to validate risks in potentially 3 areas. The first is where a technological risk. In some cases that's not present. The second is a market risk, aka is there a market for whatever it is we end up building? Any form of market, but something that's large enough to sustain a business that's the size of a business that would be needed to serve this product in that market. And then the first one is, can you facilitate a behavioural change? And that's the hardest one of all. Right, so you're trying to get people from going to not doing something to doing it. And if you take Uber didn't have to facilitate a behavioural change. They just had to facilitate a technological and a market shift. Right, so that's a little bit easier. If you think about it like that, like we all still move from A to B, and we take any mode of transport that's available to us, just put it on the roads. So the behavioural change of starting, like we didn't all go from A to B for the first time when we used an Uber. We'd already been doing that all along. So if you think about your business like that, in those three dimensions, and Google took a big bet on all three back in the late 90s, 1996 or 7 or 8, whenever they really got going. I think only at the time maybe 5 to 10% of the world was online, probably even less. So they were making a bet that there'd be a behavioural shift, not only of people moving from not using the internet to using the internet, but that when they did that, that there would be behaviour of searching the net. Secondly, obviously, there's a huge technological kind of risk that they took, but that was probably their least risky move, seeing as they had a different approach. And thirdly, could they capture that market? You know, and they managed to do that.
Right. Now, in terms of acquisition, let's talk about what you guys went through, what Ausmed went through to acquire your first users, and what have you found really helpful in terms of the very top when you wanted to go about and acquire users.
Yeah. So the first few users came from those impromptu testing at hospitals. And what you'll probably find, even in most industries, is that groups of professionals actually congregate in the same place throughout the day. All the web developers are all in web development teams or agencies. All the teachers are all at schools. And that's what we saw with Code the Future. It's another organisation I was involved in. Once we got one teacher in a school, we had all the teachers in that school very, very quickly. And we built marketing methods around that kind of movement of a message through the school. We weren't trying to facilitate like sharing things on social media or viral clicks. We were like seeding the community with ideas. So maybe I'll talk about that approach to referral as part of acquisition. Yeah.
Go down. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we would does it yeah. In terms of, sorry, I'll just go back up a level. So one of the things that we had to our advantage at Ausmed, which is probably an unfair advantage for anyone else trying to do this, was that we had this huge events business. So we could go down there every day and go to an event anywhere we wanted, show up and just say, hey, we know you've done all this CPD, we're from Ausmed, let us show you how to document it. If we didn't have those events, we would have tried to find that. But that wasn't to grow the user base substantially, that was to do that kind of initial testing. Separate to that, the channels that worked were all of the new kind of anything that was a new way to get app installs or website signups, any new media, any new inventory from Facebook or Apple or whatever, we'd always jump on that first. We still do. Encourage all of you to do that as well. And the reason for that, and they were probably the most successful channels, we'd get cost per installs of an app from like 12 cents to $1 max in the first year, and as we kind of started to saturate the market, those ranges have kind of doubled, so maybe 25 cents to $2 now. And there's still...
This is on Facebook?
Across the board, Facebook, AdMobi, Apple Search ads are a big one still. I know the finance sector is really flooded now with Bitcoin apps advertising, but besides from that, most other sectors on App Store is still very cheap. Google Play still sells lots of installs, very cheap prices if you've got an app. So we would just kind of find those channels, we'd experiment with them. The moment we found a campaign run, we'd just flood the budget and just try and buy more market share, more impressions. And we still do that today.
Right. And I want to talk about data as we go through the funnel and activation. So, a user comes on the platform and start experiencing what the platform is like. And then at some point you're looking to activate them, right? And at a later point you're trying to make sure they come back to the application. Now, how do you go about doing that? What is the what is the mindset you guys take on to track that and say yes, this is an active user, no, this is not an active user, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So activation is, does everybody know what activation is?
Yeah, maybe it would be good to define activation first, yeah.
Alright, cool. I'm going to keep trying to involve the audience here because it is Wednesday night before a public holiday. So,
we're in a dangerous place.
Yeah. Has anybody heard of a man named Clayton Christensen? Anybody else? You need to read his stuff. If you take one thing away from tonight, read his work. There'll be a video on the net of an hour of summing up the way that he thinks. He's the guy who coined the phrase disruptive innovation 25 years ago. He's a fantastic researcher from MIT in the US. And his whole contention is that products solve problems, right? And products do jobs. And consumers employ products to do jobs for them. Now, if I said to you, why do you go to Google? What's the job to be done? If you've ever heard that phrase, job to be done, that's where it comes from, Clayton Christensen. What's the job to be done at Google? Maybe Tom.
Show me the results in the search that I'm asking for.
Yeah, perform a search, get instant results. Right? Now, Google did that on day one. What do they do today? Google.com, what does it do today? Same thing. How many billions of dollars has Google spent making that product better? Many, many billions. So what's changed? If you look at the design from a technical perspective, actually nothing. It's still a form with a submit button that runs a script that serves search results. They spend $1 billion to get rid of you having to click search, right? So it just happens. They spend $1 billion trying to organize search results better, improving the graph. That's what they're focused on. They spend another $1 billion or $10 billion making it faster. And those companies, if you've ever heard of VC say, like, do you have product market fit? That's a business that has product market fit. It's built a problem to a solution that together creates a product, and a market kind of emerges around it. So activation is when a user employs a product to do a job, that the product's actually able to do that job. Now, if Google didn't return a search result, the user leaves thinking, I'm stupid, I don't know how to use this, 90% of the time, and 10% of the time it doesn't work. And that's only the people who feel confident with technology. Most of the way a user expresses their interactions with technology is a failure on their part, right? And that kind of leaves them a bit scarred. And it's very, very important in those first, it's like a baby when a user visits your site. It's those first few steps. They hit your site. Every user's gonna make between one and like an undefined number of clicks, like an infinite amount of clicks trying to figure out what's going on. You see a young user, they might just click, or someone who feels like a digital native, they might just click 600 times and then go, nah, it doesn't work. I've tested everything, I've clicked every button, risk-free, just flying through the site. The only thing that couldn't keep up is the speed of the net. Then you've got these other users represent the bulk of the market that are like, they don't want to fail. So they're very, very reluctant to give one click. And when they do, and if they don't get what they're after, they're failed and they leave. Maybe a smaller group of them stay around, they give another click. It's like this call and response. So the activation goal of any website is delivering on the promise that your marketing or your product is making to the user. So if it's Dropbox, it's uploading a file. If people can't figure out how to do that, everything else that Dropbox does is useless. The fact that it shares a file, it's useless unless there's one in there. If Google can't help you do a search and can't help like 99.999% of the population do a search, then they're missing out on some part of the market. And that's what they're spending billions of dollars doing, going from 80% of people being successful at searches to 85 to 90 to 95 to 100. So if you think about your product and you boil it down in that, like a really utilitarian kind of manner, I can give you two really simple examples, like what does a hammer do? Bangs nails in. If you used it to do the washing up, it wouldn't work. Think about your product like that. It does a job, that's all. It's all it's doing. It's doing a job. And that job is what you need to show the user. You need to deliver on that within 5, 10, 15 seconds, as fast as you can when they hit your site or hit your product. Start to show that you can do what it is that solve the problem that they have.
Gotcha. Let's relate that to Ausmed, right? What do you guys consider an activation for Ausmed? What is an active user? And because the reason I'm asking is the next question I want to ask is, okay, so how do you measure that, right?
So an active user, someone who activates for us is someone who documents a CPD activity. And what that basically is we use event streaming as a kind of data engineering, I guess, method of collecting data. Is everybody familiar with event streaming? So I'll just give a quick explanation because it kind of relates to I suppose, the rest of the questions. So everyone would be familiar with the click stream. The click stream is basically, it's so named because a user makes a click, and on a web server they're requesting a document when they make a click. They're generally requesting a document or processing a form or something like that. And the click stream is the movement of the user's clicks in a stream, like one after the other. And from the click stream we can start to infer a path that the user's taken through the website as they move through documents on the server, web pages. In the modern era of web applications where everything's built with JavaScript, often the pages aren't changing, like the paths aren't changing, but just parts of the page that the user started on is. For example, when you endlessly scroll your Facebook feed, all of the kind of scaffold of that site just sits there, you're still on facebook.com, the main directory, but the content's changing. So to measure that type of behavioural change without a document change, we use what's called the event stream. If you use Google Analytics, it's defaulted to the clickstream. Like most analytics packages are defaulted to the clickstream. The only case in Google Analytics where the event stream is present is the under behaviour conversions. I think it's goals, something like that. Yeah, and then you'll see this one little item called events. And that's the event stream, where you can start to pass through actions that took place on the site, behaviours. Now you can code those behaviours into your web app using analytics.js as a library, but you can make it all yourself if you like. But basically when a user clicks on something that you care about, such as performing a search, you want to be able to track when they clicked on that. You can send a server-side event, such as search results returned. You can pass through any knowledge inside that event about that behaviour, such as what the search query was and how many results were available, how long it took, that kind of thing. And then you can start to put that into marketing analytics packages and marketing comms packages. And a really great example of a marketing kind of comms tool that uses the event stream is Facebook. So Google Analytics is built on the click stream, Facebook's built on the event stream. If you go into your Facebook Business Manager after this, you'll see all the language is actually the word event. They're describing all the behaviours as events.
Right. And how do you use that for the growth of the business? So let's say somebody comes in on Ausmed and they go through a process that you're interested in. First of all, what do you use to measure that, if you don't mind saying? Yeah. And second, once they complete that path, what kind of action does Ausmed take after that?
Yeah. So, to answer this, has anybody got a web app that they use, that they're building? It's not Robot. Oh, yes. Tom, what's your one?
Yeah, with Kydeos to me, it's a hybrid product on my own.
Mm-hmm. And what's the job to be done?
The job to be done is get a car for it.
For a rental car?
For a new car. Or a
new car. Alright, cool. So I'll use that example and I'll use Ausmed as well to explain this. So what I mostly see is that product and marketing teams make a lot of assumptions about how successful their users are with using their technology. And with us, before we were really thinking about activation, and we've just deployed the first version of the web app, and people were signing up, we wanted to start measuring how many of them had actually documented CPD. That was a kind of promise to our users: we can help you document your CPD. So the question was, how many had at least documented one record of CPD? And we didn't really look at it because we thought, oh, it must be like pretty high. Like, why would you sign up for this app to document CPD and never really get to it? Why would you go to a website to find a quote for a car and not actually do that? Why would you download and waste your data on a stock market app, another case that I've seen, and never add a stock to that app, right? Now, if you've ever used your product with its empty states, which is the default state when no records are in the database, so you've never made a car quote, you've never added a stock to the Apple Stocks app, go in and delete all the stocks that are in the Apple Stocks app, you'll see what I mean. You'll observe that it's actually really hard to add one back in. Right, so there's no kind of activation process built into a lot of these apps. They start, the way that they solve that problem is they start with these default empty states which have like 5 stocks everyone wants to follow, or 5 cars everyone wants to buy, or 5 types of CPD everybody does. Right? So what the numbers that I've seen just by default, and if you look at your own database and you haven't got the event stream running or anything like that, you can basically just go and say, okay, how many customers have ever signed up? And that becomes your denominator. And whatever our job to be done is, book a car quote or get a car quote, how many quotes have we delivered to unique customers? That's your numerator. There's your activation rate. You'll be really surprised. It could be as low as 18%. You'd be lucky if it's higher than 40% if you've never spent any time on it. So that's what we saw when we first went in, and we just kind of like, of course they're using it. Why wouldn't they be? It was about 18% of people have been successful. Yeah. So how that impacts your acquisition, because those customers have already been bought now. So if I was working on a cost per acquired customer of $1, and I'm only activating 18%, let's say 20% of them, my cost per activated customer is now $5. Right? So the cost just went right up. Now we've got a low CPA or CPI or whatever, cost per acquired customer. If it was $20 and the activation rate, which most people aren't looking at, was 20%, then the cost per acquired customer is actually $100. So that's why activation is like the key step in the path to conversion. And one last little thing about this. The other way to look at it is 80% of people who signed up left with the conclusion it doesn't work. Right? And the way most marketing would work, and so would we, is that we would send them an email like a week later saying, tell all your friends about us. And they're like, okay, it doesn't work, everybody. 80% of the time. So if you're not getting these things right in the right order, your referral is going to be like 1%, because it's the 10% of the people who actually, of the 20 or 50% that actually retain of the group that actually activate. Like it traces right back up the line. So you kind of really have to start at the top.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you do with those individuals who have signed up and just not doing anything? You go to a website.
Yeah, so the question is, what do you do, at least in Ausmed, for example, what do you do if somebody signs up to the application and they haven't activated it, right? They're not using it properly, or they just left. Yeah, so what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we spent about 6 months optimizing activation, just endlessly, and we managed to get it up to 85%. So we moved it from 20% to 85% over that 6-month period. And only when it hit that point were we comfortable at really scaling acquisition.
So what are your examples?
Yeah, so in terms of what we do, most of what you see on most websites is just in the way. Just move it out of the way. Just get rid of it half the time. If you think of Google's, like, I can give you some really classic examples, like Snapchat is a really great example. Activation, if you re-download, I'll give you three good tips, 3 good places to go. So first one is just build an interface that does that job. Good example of that is a pedestrian crossing button. It has discoverability, which is the kind of interface and the arrow. It has feedback, which is the light and the noise, and then it works after some period of time, hopefully. So design an interface that just does the job and forget about everything else. Don't even really explain it. Right? Because most of those people are entering in with a lens of, I'm trying to solve this problem, I don't need to read all this stuff, just let me add it and I'll give it a crack. So just design those really simple interfaces. Snapchat's another good example. If you re-sign up for Snapchat, you'll see that it just opens up, asks permission for the camera, loads the camera. The only button on the screen to begin with was a take photo button. And it just said, tap to take a photo, press hold to take a video. Now that triggers the core workflow of that app. Once you've got a photo, you're now on to part 2 of 3 stages to actually share a video with your friends. The second tip would be build a button. So if most websites do one thing, then they just need one button. And if you go to, and like I probably will end up saying this my whole life, but honestly, every website just needs a single button that says click here to do whatever, like what our core value prop is. And I think, in the case of Ausmed, we introduced a button called Document CPD. It was a blue button, and it was the single most prominent element on our whole site. And straight away all the clicks went up, and everyone was like, no one ever reported saying, I can't find the button to Document CPD. And just by being the largest thing, we're kind of inferring that this is what most people come here to do. So we're able to start funneling that traffic through. And the third tip is use user onboarding. Have you ever heard of that site? If you just Google user onboarding, I think it's called user onboard.
Yeah, right. The one that has the screenshots and with the arrows and describes. Yeah.
So user onboard is run by a guy somewhere in the US who basically signs up to all these services and annotates the sign-up flow and explains what's going on and runs you through that process so that we don't have to keep creating accounts and when we want to see what they're doing, and takes you through that point of activation. And it kind of explains like the user's now activated. A good example of activation kind of gone wrong was Twitter's kind of, I believe, I don't have any evidence of this, but was their kind of correlation versus causation assumption around number of followers means a user becomes more engaged. So they changed their activation goal in the onboarding flow to following a whole lot of people. And the way that they did that was they used a button called follow 25 people or something like that. Because they found that users who had once a user followed 25 people, you've probably heard this story, they were more likely to remain a long-term retained user. But that's kind of cheating, and in my experience it doesn't work. I'm not sure if it works for them. But they've also changed the core value prop of the app from tweeting to following, because that's what they're trying to get everybody to do. I believe they've changed it back now to tweeting. So hone in on that core value prop, figure out exactly what you do, just build the simplest way to deliver on that promise to the user, put it behind a button and clear all the clutter out of the way. And if you need any tips on how to improve the activation rate, go to user onboarding and just click through and see all the things that everyone else is doing.
Right. Now, when you have a question?
Quick question. When you were rating it 20% to 85%, how much of that was actually product activation work versus like reducing the amount of people who are actually coming into the app so the activation rate went up?
Reducing the amount of
work, how much was product work?
Yeah. About
repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah. So the question was, of the group that activate, which is say 85%, what percentage of those activated as part of their initial onboarding experience in the product, versus and what percentage were kind of where the activation was completed through a marketing event, such as an email or a retargeted ad. So in our product we have about 400 individual behaviours that we record in the form of events, which means we can kind of work out exactly where someone's dropped off a flow. Facebook and most marketing platforms can subscribe to that whole stream. And you can basically set up targeting rules in Facebook or Google or whatever it is, Google AdWords, AdMobi, where you say, if a user has triggered this event but not this event, serve them this ad. And the ad might be something like, hey, finish creating your account, click here to do that. You get very high kind of click-through rates. I'm just explaining the marketing comms around activation. You can do the same thing with emails, SMS, push notifications. Vero is the product that you want to use. Vero is an event-driven marketing platform. MailChimp and all those stuff, they don't operate on the event stream. Even though they say they can do behavioural marketing, it's not the same technology. So in our case, it's about 68 to 70% is product activation, and the remainder is filled with marketing activation. which means it's a conversion rate of 50% or 40% from the marketing campaigns that get run off that remaining 30% group. And then, what's the global maximum, really? It's not 100%. The final email that we send in any of these campaigns is one that comes from a staff member personally. It's automated, but if they reply, the staff member who's responsible for that part of the product will get the response, and it says, "Hey, is something going wrong? Like you download this app. We really want to help you. Most people have kind of been successful by now. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Happy to jump on a call and show you what works and step you through it." And majority of that remaining 15% reply saying, "Oh no, I don't know what I did. It's on my phone. I don't know how to get rid of it. Like I'm not a health professional. Like I was trying to download a game or something. So it just lost on the internet. So the global maximum is more like maybe 90%, not 100%. 1 in 10 people who probably click on any website or ad or download any app are in the wrong place.
Right. Okay.
I think.
Fair enough. Now, let's briefly touch on retention as well, and then let's turn the focus on data. How does, let's say a user is now active, what do you now do to make sure they come back to the application?
Yeah. So the first thing about retention is most companies, I always call Google Analytics. It's like if every business was given the same chart of accounts to run their business. It's like, here's a standard chart of accounts, go and report on your business in a unique way. Page views, clicks, and it starts to kind of lead you down this path of caring about all this stuff that doesn't make any difference. Retention has its version of the kind of generic chart of accounts, and it's what's your monthly active users. Now if you've got, so the first thing you need to think about with retention is not what's your monthly active users, that might not be relevant whatsoever. It's what's the natural usage pattern of the product that you make. Is it every workday? Is it every weekend? Is it every month? Is it every quarter? Maybe you make a product that helps people do their BASes. Is it every year? Maybe it's a personal tax return software. Now, the first thing, the way you want to look at retention is understanding that natural pattern of usage. And your users will use the product in all different ways. So in our case, we have different cohorts, effectively, of users, of people. Some are doing education every week, highly engaged learners. Maybe they've got a new job that they're applying for. Some are doing it once every 6 months. So what we look at is, it's kind of like, we're really interested in yearly active users. Now we have a high rate of monthly active users, but if we were to just look at that, it doesn't talk to the actual total number of people who used us. I'll just use a tax return example. Like we know by the end of July or by the end of, say, June 30, how many people did their tax return with us last year that also did it the year before. And that's really what we would care about in our business as a retention metric. So, because you're tracking, the second part of retention is, so first is the natural usage pattern. The second part is, remember, logging into a product is not what your product was made for. It's kind of like sign-up flows where the first questions are upload your photo and make your profile. It's like, unless this is an app where I make an online profile, this is all a waste of time. Like I said right at the start, I'm going to give you 5 clicks or 7 clicks or 10 clicks or 2 clicks for you to show me that you can solve the problem that I've got. So when you look at retention, don't just jump over to like how many people logged in or how many people did something else that is kind of what I'd describe as a supporting value prop. Ask that really tough question, which is how many people still use the core value prop divided by the natural usage pattern. So using that methodology, I actually wrote a blog post where I kind of worked out Airbnb's actual retention rate. You can read it, I think it's like just Google Airbnb retention rate. If it doesn't come up, add my name, SEO is not working. But you can look at the total number of users that Airbnb have got, because they tell you that. We can times it by the number of average holidays a person takes in a year. I think it's like 1.9, believe it or not. So they've got something like 20 million users, so that's 40 million holidays. And then they publish the data of how many holidays are booked. Now, if you divide the holidays booked by the total number of users, because the actual average number of holidays per year is 1.9, you get a double. Their retention rate looks really good. In fact, it almost looks twice as good as what it is. So their real retention rate is the answer to the question, when a user needs to take a holiday, how many of our users use Airbnb to book their accommodation? Right? Not how many Airbnb users have used Airbnb in the past year to book a holiday. Do you see what I mean? Because every Airbnb user is taking more than one holiday. So anyway, have a read of that and it runs you through the methodology, but that's the level of detail you want to go to. Once you bring these numbers to the fore in that early day, in those early days, like you don't feel guilty or ashamed or like, oh my God, this is all a big fraud. You actually just, it's exposed and you start to care about it and you start to optimize it and improve it.
Right, gotcha. Okay, before moving on data and topic of data, are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions on activation, retention? Cool. Well, definitely I think data is something very close to your heart. I remember 2 years ago, or something like that, two and a half years ago, when I met Will, he's like, do you know DevOps? I'm like, yeah. He's like, in the future, in the next couple of years, we're going to have data ops. Do you remember that? And I was like, what is that? What do you mean? So tell us a little bit about the power that data has played in growth of Ausmed. How did that, where did this fascination come, and how has it powered Ausmed?
Yeah, so what I believe more than anything else when it comes to building a company is that if you don't own the data underpinning your industry, the raw kind of data schema, which is basically like a map of all of the features of the data set of the industry that you play in, and a way to collect that data, then you're going to be beaten by someone who does. That's what I kind of think, right? Now, if you look at companies like Apple, Amazon, the way that they move in these data plays, that's their first move. Amazon comes into a market, it offers this fantastic service where it lets all these companies, aren't they lovely, sell all their products on Amazon, in this marketplace and access all of Amazon's customers. I think they've got like 300 signed up retailers in Australia at the moment. All they're trying to do is understand the data, all of the data around shopping in Australia. That's what they're trying to acquire. Right? They're just trying to acquire a data set on consumer behaviour, on average spend sizes, on frequency of purchases, on anything that they can do to optimise down the track. Once they hit that point where they have data visibility, and I always imagine it's like a Bunnings car park at night and all the lights are off. Once you've got the data, it's like flick all the lights on, everything becomes visible. The entire playing field, you can see everything that's going on everywhere. That's what they're trying to get to. They know every product that works. They know buying patterns of every cohort of every person in the country or groups of people in the country, and then they start seeding their own marketplace with products that they make or sell or get better deals on. So data, like at Netflix, is the same, right? Like all of their content is data driven. Like where's the tip? Where's the hook? Where's the drop? Like in any episode, in any series, where does it start? Right? And when data does spit out just a product, like a piece of content, and tries to be creative, you end up with that Will Smith Netflix movie where he was like an alien. I forgot the name of it. Does anyone remember? Shine, I think.
Is it orc or something?
Yeah, it's like an orc police officer in Los Angeles. Right, yeah, that's it, yeah. Check that out. It's like this mishmash of... It's basically data-driven movie development, right? Anyway, what they're trying to track is the data that underpins that industry. And because they have it, they know what content to acquire, they know who to show what to first, and everything just feels relevant, feels perfect. But actually, their market just becomes so defensible. No one can enter it because they can't get access to that data set. So if you're starting a new business, build the data set, or you've got one already and you don't have that data set on your industry, start to collect it, start to build that framework around your industry.
Right. And I know you have a framework that you go by. Do you want to talk about that as well?
Which one's that?
Well, it's not. The data pyramid. I'm referring to. You want to talk about what that is and how you use it as well as also?
So all of this data conversation, like it runs alongside marketing, but it also runs alongside product and just the business as a whole. But if you've heard of the data kind of the data to ML or like AI pyramid, it's basically working like this. Unless something's recorded, unless there's a data point on some sort of behaviour taking place, in our case it's an instance of learning. Like for example, just to give you an idea, in our industry, let's just call ourselves like, I don't know, professionals who go to meetups the night before a public holiday. How many people are going to record this learning event tonight? No one. Right, so if that data can't be... Oh, you are?
No, I'm not. I have a question. Are you offering the CPD points through Ausmed? So do you have articles available, or is it just like a log or excuse me?
Yeah, we do offer a whole lot of CPD as well, and that's our kind of like business model. We've always sold education, and the CPD documentation tool is a way to record any learning for free from any provider. So once you've got that, you then start to move to automation, because there's a possibility of automation. Because unless there's a data point that some action can be triggered from, how do you automate something? How do you automate a task? So the first layer, this is the data pyramid, the first layer is data. The actual mapping out of the schema. If you take a business like Toll, it's all of the objects, all the entities in that business model, and all of the features that describe that object. So a truck, or a product, or a package, or a driver, or whatever it is. Now you have this data fabric, like say the lights going on with the whole Bunnings car park. This data kind of layout of your entire business model. You can now have an opportunity to start automating it. If there's no data collection on the thing you want to automate, then you can't automate it. Then you move, so that's layer 2. Layer 3 is you can start to do some analysis. Maybe layer 1, 2 and 3 can be interchanged. But you can start to do some analysis to drive further automation. Layer 4 is you can start to do some machine learning, where you build a model that's able to make decisions or predictions based on the data that's being collected. And using AI as the final kind of destination, it can start to make decisions and affect change in the environment through its ability to automate things. Right? And the models that are telling it whether it's right or wrong and getting better at making those decisions. So that's the kind of pyramid. Now businesses like Amazon are trying to move through that pyramid. So is Netflix. And in order for them to be able to do it, and all of the rest of them, but in order for them to be able to do all of that, they need that data layer right down the very bottom. And so that's why I kind of contend that if in your businesses, I really encourage you to do the same thing, stake that claim.
Right. So data collection, automation, analysis, machine learning, and then AI. Does anyone have questions on that topic specifically? Yep. Go for it, Tom.
Yeah. Well, what's your chosen data capture method? What technologies do you use to actually get the data in, and in what environment?
So this comes to, we look at it in 2 types of data, stateful and stateless. And the stateful stuff is the things that don't change very often. They're held in state. And they're things like people's names, their email addresses, and they're kind of like the user tables in an application. Then we've got the stateless stuff, which is they're just the fleeting behaviours. And like if I want to know that you got downstairs safely and successfully after attending this meeting, I need to have a stateful record of who you are. And then I need to have this stateless stuff, which is like your behaviour. And I might be tracking every time you make a step, and a feature of that step might be a direction and a distance. So I might track that you take 30 steps, and then I'll fire an event off when you get to the front door, exited the building. Because I only care about exited the building, despite the fact that I only care about that, I actually need to track all the stuff on the way through if I want to know where you failed. Like, oh, you failed at the stairs. I need to put some more information there to explain you can go down the stairs and push you through. That's stateless, and the reason why it's stateless is because it's just a fleeting kind of piece of information that's temporarily useful and it becomes obsolete if you complete the task successfully. So they're the two key ones. And then what you can do with another way to look at that data is you have explicit information, stateful stuff, things that the user has told you. You have implicit information, stateless stuff, things that the user has done but they haven't told you, but you can infer things from their behaviour. And then you have inferred information as a final thing. And that's a little bit stateless, but it's more of an interpretation, and that's where Facebook really goes deep. So they can tell your literacy levels based on the number of spelling mistakes in your messages, or whatever it might be. They can tell your income level based on the hours that you're working and the hours that you're sleeping, right? And they're comparing, like, obviously, as you know, many data sets against many others, and models, data sets that they buy in from other companies or sell, maybe.
How do you collect? What methods do you use to collect that data?
Yeah.
So you can pull all of that data out of Facebook, as you know, through Cambridge Analytica. There's an example.
Straight out.
Hey?
Straight out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can get everything you want out of those systems, but
What about for your own?
so it hasn't come up yet, but like, as much as I believe, and I still do, that data ops will be a key part of every business going forward, I think like ethics is increasingly becoming a kind of consideration that isn't being made, that needs to more often be made in all of these businesses. So we try and run a really, really ethical business in this regard. And there's a lot of data that we could access, and we're aware of it, that we choose not to take because we don't want it, we don't think it's right, and we don't think the user knows that it's available. And Cambridge Analytica, like, this is years back, we've been thinking like this, and Cambridge Analytica has validated that. The way that you can store this data is in a data warehouse, if you like. You can use streaming software, as in data streaming software, to basically pull this data out of the application. Pipe is the language that's used, it into a data warehouse. Redshift is one of them, if you'd like to use that. Or you can build entire, what's now referred to as data lakes, which are effectively kind of these massive, I presume, mental model of a lake where everything's just flowing into it in a non-structured, NoSQL or SQL, anything will go kind of way, and then use various functions of AWS or whatever hosting systems you're using to pull the data back out. That's a bit technical, but that's how you get the data, move it in, and if you need help with that, hire a data engineer. This gentleman here is looking for a job in that field. Yeah.
Go for it.
What do you think about the other side of ethics around data? Not necessarily you extracting data out, but potentially you being obligated to distribute the data. For example, someone's going in and you know that they're like a job and saying, hey, I'm a healthcare professional, I've done all X, Y, Z training, but you know from your system that they haven't actually done. What's your thoughts on that side of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it comes down to the language that we use. And I remember reading a MailChimp example of this where they talk about how they've got this fantastic document called Voice and Tone. If you read it, it explains how they talk in various circumstances throughout their product and as a business. And they start all the serious sentences with, this is important. Right? So we're not all cutesy anymore, like with the little monkey, Freddie. Like, this is important, you need to pay attention. And whenever we feel that that's the case, and I think you've probably seen Apple doing this a lot lately with their new little icon for privacy and what data is being shared. LinkedIn have started doing the same thing. So, like, my belief is that these companies are well behind this stuff. Basically, the reality that the consumers thought was taking place, the perception of what we thought as consumers was being done with our data didn't match reality. And Cambridge Analytica has just brought that to the fore. But if you work at this coalfront, you'll have seen it already and seen it all day long. So I think this outward reporting is really important from an ethical standpoint. I think having controls internally around the way data is collected, managed, moved, who has access to it, all that stuff is really important. The GDPR talks a lot about this. And I just want to make 2 points on that. How many people have ever read the privacy policy of the companies that they work for? Hey? Oh, you heard it, yeah.
I said I write them, so I haven't read them.
Okay, yeah.
Accepted.
So through the privacy policy, the company that you work for is making commitments to the customer about how you as the employee is going to handle their data, what you'll do with it. Yet no one reads it. And inside a company, no one gets anyone to read it. So I think that should change, firstly. I think businesses need an internal data policy, which says this is important data, this is sensitive stuff. If you don't store it, don't email it around. If you need it to serve a customer, fine. But once that interaction ceased, leave it, treat it with kryptonite, treat it with caution. Yeah.
I would say in terms of the conditions of the privacy policy was considered on the ways.
Yeah.
Maybe people would actually read it. Maybe you can have the terms and conditions of privacy policy.
Yeah.
In picture form, for instance.
Yeah.
People would actually be more engaged with it.
Yeah, so that's what the internal data policy does. It basically plucks out for the employee, says, hey, these are the 5 commitments we've made to our customers around what we do with their data. You need to know about this. And here's the corresponding policies that outline how you can action these requests if they come through. Outside of Australia, there's the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, which is bringing in all these things as a mandatory requirement for any business that has a European-based customer, including a lot of Australian companies that we just don't know it yet. But we need to comply with these regulations now.
Right. And Will, so we're talking about that, and we're talking about the ethics. I know you're fairly active in this space. What are you doing today?
So Nathan won't be happy to hear this, but I've started a petition called Right to be Forgotten in Australia. So yeah, Nathan's having to comply with GDPR regulation in Europe, and one of the features of this regulation is that the locum of control around data sits with the user. So you have the right to permit a company to access this data, but you also have the right to revoke it. In Australia, we don't have that right. We don't have a Bill of Rights to start with, but we definitely don't have the right to revoke access to that data. Which means that it's up to the company's discretion and their terms and conditions to decide whether they want to track you forever or keep a copy of the information you gave them at one point in time forever. Or in the case of Facebook, by default, turn your page into a memorial instead of just deleting it. It's a bit, I think, outrageous, right? That's their default stance. We prefer to keep this entire data set on you for the benefit of our product with the guise of we're building the community of the world online. We're going to just turn your page into a memorial and you need to make a special request to have it deleted if this person's died. So in Europe, they've said that's not on. People need the right to request deletion, the right to deletion, the right to be forgotten. So I'm trying to bring that to Australia.
And what do you think is going to happen in Australia with what has happened in Europe?
Well,
this is very recent in Europe. So
yeah.
What do you think is going to happen here?
So I started looking at this with the GDPR stuff. I was like, geez, that's a great idea. That should exist in Australia. And there's a lot of people who say it shouldn't, and to some extent there are some issues with it, right? Such as you can ask any company to delete any records that they have on you, even if those records may be not, they need to be held. And there's ambiguity around financial records, for example, which we need to hold for 7 years.
Is the end state to that, therefore, that we don't track data? Is that the end goal?
I'm not sure. It's all I don't know, maybe, I don't know. But, so I can't remember the question.
Question was, what do you think is going to happen here in Australia?
Oh yeah, so it wasn't really being given much kind of credence until Cambridge Analytica came out. The OAIC, the Office of the Australian Information Commission or something like that, go and read their stuff. They talk about this as an issue. And they looked at the GDPR 2 years ago and said, it's not for us. We don't have a Bill of Rights and we certainly don't need all these rights around the internet, I suppose. Anyway, since the Cambridge Analytica stuff came out, they basically pulled it right forward. They left that review saying we will review this in some stage in the future. They've brought that review forward. Anyway, the petition that I'm running, right2beforgotten.org.au or datarights.org.au, is being presented in Parliament at some stage in May. So if you want to sign it, go to those websites and you can sign it. And I think it will happen in Australia.
Fantastic. What do you think are the consequences of it not happening? Right? I mean, we talked about Facebook, but what do you think are some of the more detrimental consequences of
That's a good question.
data not being deleted?
I don't think that there's malintent, in this data collection. I definitely don't think that. I think everyone genuinely is trying to do good things. Hopefully their product is good for the world, and by collecting data they're able to do it more efficiently. So having the rights to be able to do these things is not about this kind of call to arms of everyone go and delete your Facebook account. All it's about is that when you want to do that, or if you do want to do that, that it's actually your choice. You have that, you can make that decision, you have that say. Whereas right now, a company in Australia can usurp your right to do that through their terms and conditions. They can just write it off, say, no, well, you signed up at the start, and we made that clear at the start, and there's those terms and conditions that you didn't read, that we'll decide whether we provide that facility to you. So I think it's about shifting that locum of control to the user to assign or revoke permission.
Right, gotcha. Okay. I know we've gone a little bit over time, so I just want to, if anybody has some last questions, please feel free to ask. We've asked a fair number of questions during the conversation, but
I have a question about
go for it.
After the Cambridge Analytica event has happened, so about the user education, right? How do I know what is my rights and what the people are doing with my data? I don't know about it.
Yeah,
Being in the technical industry, I'm being an IT question, I don't know what should I do with that, but what my rights are.
Yeah. So the question is what my rights are. If how can I stay informed, right, about my rights?
If I'm asking this question, what about the layman who even doesn't understand
Yeah.
technology?
Yeah, I think that's the perception versus reality part of Cambridge Analytica. But the layman always kind of just wrote off like, oh, well, yeah, I don't care if they know the new name of my dog or something, like it's not sensitive information. No, it's not. That's stateful data, but what can be inferred from that becomes sensitive information. So I think you can go to Facebook, download all the stuff they've got on you. That's really interesting to see. I recommend everyone do that. Like, it's actually really interesting to see all the things that they've collected, even things you haven't posted, but you've placed it in the tray to be shared, or you've written messages, then gone back, edited them. Some of the edit history has been recorded. So that, and the question is like, why is that's not stateful anymore? That's because it wasn't the message that was shared. They're monitoring movement between states, so it becomes stateless. They're trying to infer something. And then they also give you some profiling around what type of ads they serve you. And for me, it was things like emotive, passionate, advocacy, all these things that weren't words I'd ever used, but they were buckets that accurately described type of things that would probably get me to click and like on stuff. And those were the things that were being bought or pulled out through Cambridge Analytica, or by Cambridge Analytica as part of that work. So you can find it out there. You can also go to a website called, I think it's Just Delete Me, and it gives you a list of every main technology product or service, and tells you whether you can delete it, what data I think is being collected, I think that's there, and how to delete it if you do want to do that. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Anything else? I think we are. Oh,
How do
no.
you find
Please.
that data?
Yeah, I think you just go to, they've made it a lot easier to find actually, but if you just go to Facebook settings, like it's something like download my data, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, with him talking in front of Congress, I'm sure while he was talking, they brought that button really
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, on that note, as always, it was a pleasure talking to you. Very insightful. Thank you so much. So if everyone could give you a hand and.
wish you all the best with whatever it is that you're building. And, good. I hope some of the stuff we've talked about tonight is of benefit. So thanks for coming along.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Shaheen.
you. And we'll stick around. So if you want to have a chat, I think we're out of pizzas, but yeah, we'll definitely stick around. We're gonna upload the video of this conversation on our Slack channel.
And
So
words, speaking notes.
and speaking notes. So we're gonna send a link for the Slack channel and an invitation to everyone. So make sure you click on that and you have access to the video. And it's kind of like we're creating this community on Slack so that if anyone has questions about anything growth related, you'll be able to ask from the community. So yeah, thank you very much, and chat to you in a couple minutes.